Aha! At long last, after only nearly 10 minutes, this wretched system has decided to work. There we go. Sorry, everybody, for keeping you waiting. Looks to me there are only 3 people waiting anyway, but one of those is probably me. Good morning, Miss Connie, and good morning, Natalia, as well. So, thank you for being so patient. How very annoying. I have no idea why that happened. What happened the first time round is the main internet just switched itself off. So yet again, I shall need to get in touch with PlusNet and ask them why it is that I'm bothering to pay them any money, and see if they've got any good answers this time round. Then I tried my hotspot on the phone, and that seemed to work after a long time, after renewing the whole thing a couple of times. There we go. Anyway, here we are. Let's crack on and see what we can get on with. Today we are going to be doing what? Looking at Acts chapter 22, verses 17 to 25. And you might notice there's a bit brighter in this room than normal, not just because I've got that circular thing on, sort of sunshine rays pouring down on me, but indeed the radiance of the solar globe is even coming through the window to my left and bringing light and beauty onto the little pot of flowers that I have in the window here. Various different types of succulent, along with a school bell for some peculiar reason. Anyway, there we are. Kaiser. There we are. Good morning, Bev. Good morning, Kaiser. God bless you too. We're going to read from verses 17 to 25. So let's get on with it. And when we had come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. When he had greeted them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified God, and they said to him, "You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not circumcise their children, nor walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality." And there we go. So verse 17, and when we had come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. They are staying, of course, in the house of Matins, and presumably it's not all the brethren that are greeting them gladly that particular day, because the next day they seem to be being greeted all over again. But those people associated with this particular household are getting to them. St. Paul wanted to get to Jerusalem in time for Pentecost. You'll remember back the chapter before last, or even the chapter before then. That's why he didn't go to Ephesus. He was hurrying off to Jerusalem. But when he arrives in Caesarea, he seems to have forgotten about this and is carrying on as before. Anyway, presumably it's sometime in the early summer, late spring. And he's welcomed, it says, as menos in the Greek. That means with pleasure, with gladness, with joy. So they're delighted to see him. And who meets them at this moment? The brethren do. The brothers and sisters, probably of the house of Matins. Good morning, Brother Jean-Marie. By those elders And then the next day, on the following day, verse 18, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. So he meets James. This is the brother of the Lord James, not James the Great, not the less. And the elders, the presbyters, the word presbyteros, from which we get the word priest. So in other words, this is a big official meeting. He's not having a sort of general cozy chat over cups of tea and coffee and little honey buns. He is having a big meeting, and they're having this big meeting partly because St. Paul, once upon a time Saul, a student of the famous teacher Gamaliel, has become a really controversial figure, not just in Judaism, but also within Christianity. And what happens then? When he had greeted them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. So St. Paul gives a report, and he does so, in Greek it says, kath en ekaston, by one each. In other words, episode by episode, he tells them what has happened. So the word detail is quite a good one there. Episode by episode, he tells them exactly what happened. Among the Gentiles, by God, through his ministry. And that's important. So, although he's giving his report in detail, he makes it clear that this is God's action and God is only working through him. And of course, he's been away for several years. This is going to be quite a long report that he's going to be giving. But we're used to St. Paul speaking so long that people fall asleep in windows, fall to their death. And verse 20, when they heard it, they glorified the Lord. So that's the first thing that happened. And they said to him, you see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they're all zealous for the law. There's several interesting things there. First of all, they hear what he said, and they're not going to criticize him. They're not wanting to criticize him. They're thrilled to bits to hear what has happened through Paul, that God has done amongst the Gentiles. That's the first bit. The second thing is, so they glorify God. The second thing is, they remind Paul that while he's been away, they haven't been lazy either. Myriads of Jews have been converted. Now, the population of Jerusalem at that time, nobody quite knows, was something between 20 and 50,000 people. At the very least 20,000, and at the most 50,000. So not a vast population, but quite a lot. And a myriad is 10,000 people. So they're saying, look how many myriads of the Jews have been converted while you've been away. So tens of thousands of us have become Christian. But what about these guys? So that's a large proportion. So maybe 10,000 people in Jerusalem are now Christian, maybe more. In the area, myriads. And they're all zealous for the law. So these Jewish Christians are no less Jewish than they were before. They're keeping the law. And on top of that, they're recognizing that our Lord and God and Savior Jesus Christ is indeed exactly that. So that is pretty important. Okay? So they glorify God. So the background of this is quite important too. The Jewish officials were not so fussed about people having a variety of beliefs, so long as they kept to the big things of the law, specifically circumcising boys and keeping the Sabbath. Those are the big two things they really wanted everybody to keep. Everything else, well, they wanted them to keep that as well. But then within that, there's quite a lot of leeway. If you think about the Pharisees on the one hand, who believed in the resurrection and angels and life of the world to come and so on, and the Sadducees, who didn't believe in any of those things, but believed that the temple worship was important and that God was blessing them in this life. And then somewhere outside that, the Essenes, who were a sort of strongly ascetical group of people living out in the desert and doing their own thing there. All of these people were tolerated within Judaism. And as far as they were concerned, this bunch of Christian Jews could be tolerated as well. They were no great shakes. They kept the law. They carried on doing all the things they'd done before. They did indeed have some odd things about them. They had tried to kill them off, and that hadn't particularly worked, but there wasn't any massive persecution. Indeed, James and myriads of others were staying in and around Jerusalem. And it appears by then, because St. James also gets the name the Just, that quite a number of the Jewish leaders thought of him quite highly. So they were not continuing any of these persecutions against them. They were not all that bothered. However, if St. Paul is going to teach everybody that you don't need to keep the law, then they were going to be bothered. Then all these persecutions were going to start again. And I guess that they were not all that keen on that happening. Meanwhile, also back at the ranch, amongst the Christian Jewish population, they also knew that Paul had been saying to fellow Jews elsewhere that they didn't need to keep the law, or so not the Sabbath and not circumcising their children. Okay, verse 21. But they have been informed about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles, and that's important, the Jews among the Gentiles. So the Gentiles are the majority population, and the Gentiles are not, to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not circumcise their children, nor walk according to the customs. Okay, so that is a difference in teaching there. Now, what does this mean? It means that the Jewish people who were Jewish already in Jerusalem were having their Jewish customs Christianized. And the Gentile people and the Jews living amongst the Gentiles were having their customs Christianized. But the Gentiles didn't need to become Jews, and the Jews didn't need to become Gentiles in order to become Christian. Okay? Now that's terribly important when we're thinking about Christianizing some other culture. So if you look at Greek culture, then the Greek culture has been Christianized. You see sort of hints of this in certain customs that they have. I mean, if you think about the koliva the Greeks offer, they always put liberal amounts of pomegranate seeds on top of the grains that they bring. That is exactly the sacrifice that was given to Pluto, the god of the underworld, when somebody had died, so that this person would be able to have a good journey into the afterlife. So that is a pagan custom, a Greek pagan custom, Roman pagan custom that has been Christianized. And that's not unusual. If you go to Kenya and you have a look at the worship there, you'll see that it's radically different from the worship in anywhere in the West. It would be wrong to bring their style of worship into our churches. And so they use drums, and they dance, and they do all sorts of other things within their church and they ululate and so on, which is what they do. Similarly, if you go to an Arab country and attend the worship there, which is stunningly beautiful, I might say, it's exceedingly Byzantine, but also there are times when they have things that are very distinctly Arabian, Arab, Lebanese, or Syrian taking place within there, which is fascinating for somebody like me, which would not necessarily translate very well into this country. The way, for example, that they have their funerals in this country here, I think it would probably give the undertakers heart attacks, let alone any casual bystanders going past the church, the wild ring of the bells, the firing off of big rockets and things that go bang in the sky and shooting guns and huge displays of flowers, which can sometimes be torn to pieces, and an enormous, and filling in the grave yourself and all that sort of thing. These are big things. The other day I had a funeral here, and the undertakers were mighty surprised that all the people were standing around waiting for the grave to be filled in, and hadn't realized that this was a separate job by a separate person who'd come somewhat later and do that job when everybody had gone. So I invited them all back here, and they drank coffee and ate biscuits and things, and then an hour or so later went back and laid their flowers and things on top of the grave, having thrown a whole heap of flowers into the grave. Okay, so you Christianize the local culture, in other words, and if it's Jewish in a majority Gentile culture, well, that's, friends, is what you're going to get. Christians in a Jewish culture, that's what you're going to get. Christians in a Japanese culture, you won't be surprised, it's going to have a big Japanese influence within it. There we go. So we're not trying to make Greeks or Russians or Jews or Japanese or Kenyans of people sitting around in our culture, but it is the local culture that is going to be Christianized, so that when Miss Connie goes along to her church, there should be a very Australian feel to it. Not necessarily going to say that maybe even the iconostas is decorated with kangaroos and wallabies and what are those funny things called? Platypuses and things like that. Or was that New Zealand? Anyway, okay, and around here, maybe with blackbirds and crows and jays and magpies and things like that, good, well decorated. In Greece, you have the iconostases tend to be decorated with things like gardenias, little wooden gardenias and stuff. Maybe here, roses would be more appropriate. Okay? Some countries, morning glory, or those beautiful jacaranda flowers. Right, there we go. I don't know where we are. What was I talking about? Don't I go on? Why don't I shut up? Verse 22, here we are. What then, says St. James? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. The Greek doesn't have the word assembly in it, but it says, what then? They must certainly meet. Who must certainly meet? And it's not entirely certain who we're talking about here. It could be that we're talking about the assembly of the Christians. They've just been talking about Christians. This makes some sense. Most of the church fathers, though, think that what St. James is talking about is the they who will meet is the Sanhedrin, and the Jewish people will meet, the Sanhedrin will meet. And they will have heard that St. Paul has arrived there. Okay? But it doesn't really matter because both lots need to be in some way shown that St. Paul is not going to go against them. Don't think Miss Connie liked the idea of having kangaroos all over her iconostasis, but why not? I think it'd be rather beautiful. Whatever the local grasses are and stuff. Maybe pampas grasses in places like Peru and Uruguay. So the Jews are going to hear, either Christian Jews or the Jewish Jews, they're going to hear. Verse 23 and 24. They have a plan. Therefore, do what we tell you. This is slightly too much making it sound like an order. The Greek itself makes it clear this is a suggestion. Do what we suggest. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. These are men who would have made a Nazirite vow. So they don't drink strong drink, they don't cut their hair, they don't do all sorts of other things, they don't eat meat for a period. And then when that comes to an end, they go through a period of purification and re-enter the temple. Take them and be purified with them and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads and that all may know that those things which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself walk orderly and keep the law. What they're wanting to show is that St. Paul is able conspicuously to keep the law. That is going to be the important bit. Good morning, Sam. Just been talking about funerals. And here we have Sam, who undertakes funerals. There we are. He will conspicuously keep the law. The Nazirite law vow has been completed, and St. Paul will pay for them and accompany them. In other words, he is fully on side with this aspect of the law. And then they all think all will be sweetness and light, both in the Christian Jewish community and also with the Jewish community. And everybody will be smiling and happy and, sharing sweets with each other and being all hunky-dory. That is not how it's going to turn out. Okay, never mind. I discovered when I was thinking about sweetness and light, I wrote that down. Now, where does that saying come from? Is it from Shakespeare? I'm trying to think of somewhere I might have read it in Shakespeare, but it isn't. It actually comes originally from Jonathan Swift, the writer of Gulliver's Travels. But in a book that he wrote in 1704, The Battle of the Books, where he was arguing about whether they should have the modern teaching of Latin and Greek, the Renaissance teaching Latin and Greek, or whether they should go back to the more medieval ideas. And he's also the one, apparently, that invented the saying about standing on the shoulders of giants. You could see so far into the distance because the giants who had gone before, and we who are but dwarfs in 1704, and imagine what you think of us now, ants, we who are but dwarfs are able to see so far into the future and see so clearly because the giants who stood there before us. Okay, there you go. Oh, that's interesting, Miss Connie. Okay, that's really interesting. Let's try and find a picture of that. Anyway, always going to be sweetness and light. So the Jews can remain Jews and everybody be there with broad smiles on their faces. Meanwhile, they're also concerned about what the Gentiles might think when they hear this. And St. James says, you know, St. Paul, he probably didn't call him St. Paul, you know, my dear brother Paul, you don't need to worry about those folks back in Ephesus. We've already written to them, haven't we? And we have said the following. Concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing. So they don't need to keep the Sabbath, they don't need to circumcise their children, they don't need to keep any of the Jewish laws, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, from reality. So those are the things that are within the First Council of Jerusalem, which you can read in chapter 15, somewhere in the middle of chapter 15, and go and read that yourself. You can read the letter that they sent. So the two questions are clear. One, should Jews stop being Jews? Answer, no. That is not necessary. Question number two, should Gentiles become Jews? Answer, no. This also is not necessary. But you have to bear in mind that St. Paul did circumcise St. Timothy. So even he is making some leeway within this so that everybody can work together and be together. Okay, there we are. That's enough for today. Bev says that she really enjoys my description of church culture around the world. Yeah, I mean, it's nice, isn't it? I love seeing them, finding out that sort of thing. It's wonderful. Ms. Connie says, there is Sturt's desert pea flowers on the Serbian Orthodox iconostasis in the desert town of Kuba Pidi. Yes, Southern Australia, presumably. So, Serbian Orthodox Kuba PDSA. Let's see if there's some nice pictures of that later on. Ben, good morning. Ben, do you know it's any morning? Nice to see you there. Ben is having to buy a new car. Well, it's an old new car, a different car. This old one is rapidly going fat. This is what happens, I'm afraid. Prophet Elias. I shall see if I can find it. Good. Christos, Kalimerasas. Very late. Well, we started very late because the internet wasn't working properly. And good morning, Mariana. That's great. Okay, we're going to pray for people. If you like this, you might think about putting a thumbs up. That would be good. But in the meantime, maybe we can pray for the Serbian Orthodox in Kuba Pidi down in southern Australia. St. Prophet Elias Church. That's wonderful. But also pray for Nicholas, who's very, very poorly. For Andreas, who is very poorly, but eating a bit more, thank heavens. For Nicoletta, for Daniel, who continues to improve, but hasn't yet started university or started playing football. For Hilary, who's going through some pretty aggressive chemotherapy at the moment. For our friend Joseph, son of Erin. For Simon, son of Dino. For Christina and for Carol. For Carol is the mother of Thekla and Christina, and for her daughter Elizabeth, for Andrei, who is dying of cancer, for Georgia, who's also very ill, and for Jane, who is just receiving palliative care at the moment. Andrei also very poorly, receiving palliative care. Things have moved very quickly indeed for her. So keep them all, please, in your prayers. And each other, of course. It's rather wonderful that people meet like this over the day, have time for that. Well, God willing, internet willing, whatever the name of the internet here is willing, plusnet willing, we will meet again tomorrow morning, and again on Thursday. Right? Your prayers, God bless you. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.